I've been working with Keep Growing Detroit for a long time now. We're here with one of our farmers, Molly Hubble, and also actually I think in the class is the Kello, our other farmer, so he can maybe chime in the chat too on some of these things. Um, but we are going to be talking about crop planting today, and we have about 32 attendees currently. So again, just encouraging people to put your questions in the chat, and I will stay on top. Since Molly is going to be presenting today, I will, kind of make sure that she's addressing topics so she doesn't have to keep an eye on the chat so much. She can just focus on what she has planned for the presentation. Okay. Molly, can you remove that box at the top?
I don't know what this is. Sorry, guys. Is it gone?
No, it's still there. It's not that big.
I don't know what it is, honestly.
It's
Hold
not.
on.
Okay.
Weird. Interesting.
Okay, we'll give it 1 or 2 more minutes and then we'll go ahead and get started. I wouldn't worry about it, Molly. It's probably fine. It's just, it was an easy fix.
Okay.
Again, please, for those who just coming in, making sure to put your questions in the chat. Make sure that you change your settings on the chat to to be both two panelists and attendees, so everybody else can see your questions. So let's just kind of do a quick roundup on what's going on with Keep Growing Detroit. We are at the end of the growing season, of course, and got a few more weeks at the farm of putting together our final CSA shares, and then we have a Thanksgiving share coming up. Molly's had her hands full. Sounds like we're going to be distributing over 100 boxes, 127 boxes or something this coming week. So Molly's been doing a lot of work to source that produce from gardeners to distribute across the city, and work out plans for that stuff. And make a note, we're doing a virtual end of the year celebration coming up in December. I'll make sure we have the details for that before we go. I'll do a full rundown on all the details on that. So I guess without further ado, if we could give a warm digital welcome to Molly, who's going to be teaching us today. And super excited to have you guys out. Thanks for coming, and take it away, Molly.
Cool. Okay. Welcome, everybody. And also welcome weirdly to my room at home. All right. So today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, crop planning. This is, as Keto said, a big part of my job, and actually a big part of Agroecology's jobs too, who's on this in the room at the moment. So yeah, this class is kind of designed to walk you guys through the process of how to take everything you've learned from the season this year and in previous seasons and sit down with your notes and then turn that into a workable plan for next season. This actually, I'll cite her in a minute, but this is actually a borrowed PowerPoint presentation. It just has an incredible amount of information on it. I believe we'll be making this available to people afterwards because the amount of resources that are listed at the end of the presentation is pretty incredible. So in addition to that, we'll be sharing, Keto can help me do that, but a bunch of resources that in the past for this class, KGD has offered kind of like hard copies of documents and different tools that growers can use to kind of fine tune their planning. Translating it to kind of the, non-classroom online setting is a little tricky. Normally we would give you guys a bunch of handouts and spreadsheets and calculators and what have you, but we'll have to share those with you digitally now. So let's launch into it. So crop planning 2021. So what we're going to be covering in this presentation, why are we talking about this at all? Why crop planning is important, some tools for creating a crop plan, and then we're going to walk you through the steps. And this is an exhaustive list of steps. We're going to be moving fairly quickly. So again, make sure that you are chiming in with your questions via the chat function. Keto's going to keep tabs on that. But the general flow, so they're kind of, before I kind of get into this, I want to say some people, couple different schools of thought with crop planning. Some folks, and it all depends on kind of where you want to start. Some people start with their marketing plan and work backwards from their marketing plan to create something like a planting detail and how many seeds that are going in the ground at one time. And that's great if you have like a really clear picture of like you're an already established farm, maybe you've been marketing for a couple of years, you already got your feet wet, maybe you have a couple like wholesale customers. So some folks start the whole process with a marketing plan and work backwards to create their planting details and their harvest projections, all that. And some people do the reverse. So if you're in kind of the early stages of like, setting up your farm and just seeing what works for you, this presentation is actually kind of like going to present the reverse. So this presentation is start with what are my markets and then work to find a planting detail. So just a heads up, we're going, marketing first, then planting detail instead of planting detail, and then I'll figure it out later where it's going to go. Does that make sense? Cool. So the flow is, what are my goals for what I want to make this year? And if that's the case, where do I want to sell my products? And then figuring out which crops I'm going to grow when, creating a planting schedule, placing those plantings on a map that's based on your growing spaces. And then a little bit about how to make in the moment decisions and keep good records so that next year you're setting yourself up for an even easier time making your crop plans. And at the end, of course, there are going to be multiple slides with just a ton of additional resources for you guys to look into. This has traditionally been a 3.5-hour course. So I'm going to try and keep it as tight as possible because I have a feeling that you guys are going to have a lot of more specific questions. So that's my challenge. Okay. Let's see if I can go back a slide. Oops. There we go. Okay. So why are we planning? Really quick. I feel like everybody in the room probably understands why planning is important, just in general and in life, but we're planning now in winter because this previous growing season is already fresh in our minds. Some of us may actually still be actively marketing our products. So late fall and winter is always a really good time to sit with all of your notes and while it's still fresh, to get rocking and rolling. And depending on when you start your season, Some people with heated high tunnels start, January and February. For example, at Keep Growing Detroit, we tend to put our first seeds in soil the first week in February. So there really isn't a lot of time to delay planning. By January 1st, we really have to have a plan like ready to go. So winter and late fall is the appropriate time. And if you are planning well, you are really keeping tabs on like your land and making the most productive use of it. And I think this is the biggest thing for me, is that if you have a really good plan, I think all of us are aware of how busy it gets in, July and August. And if you have a good plan in place, you get to autopilot some of that workload. You get to, basically have a good pace, and it does tend to reduce stress when you have a working document that tells you what you're supposed to do each week. We're already working hard enough, and we're all very physically taxed during the growing season. So having a good plan helps to kind of free up all that mental space for the work we need to do. And yeah, every year that you plan, you get to, at the end of the season, go back and look at the plan you already made. And it should be this every year it gets slightly easier and easier. You're just fine tuning the things you did in the previous season. So largely, especially at KGD, we're making edits to what we're growing, but we're not reinventing the wheel every single year. So in an ideal situation with really good planning, every year it's getting easier and easier to do. So everyone should be doing it. Cool. And again, yeah, it gets easier. And also, this slide, it wasn't on the last slide, but with good planning, hopefully also we are earning a living or supplementing our living with what we're growing and selling off of our farms. How to plan? This is something that I struggle with. That computer icon gives me a lot of anxiety. So before you even start to plan, it's a really good idea to really think about, a week in August when, things need to be watered, bugs are putting pressure on you. You probably have, another job that you need to take care of, or family commitments or whatever. And what kind of tool or what should your plan look like in order to not increase that stress? For me, I really don't like computers. I like paper. I like how flexible it is. However, when you're doing your planning, I highly recommend using spreadsheets and computers in order to make the big plan happen, and then maybe using paper, good note taking during the season. But be really honest with yourself about what the plan should look like. If you're not a computer person like me, don't make your life more difficult. Stick with paper. And also these days, there are a number of online companies that have web-based tools, web-based planning that you can sign up for. We're not going to really get into it in this presentation, but now there are all sorts of online tools or subscriptions that you can get that will help you track, and we'll even link to your cell phone. So each week it'll send you text messages saying don't forget to put carrots in the ground, which is pretty cool. It's an expense, but for people who, like having an automated text message system to tell them when to plant things, pretty cool. Cool. Spreadsheets. I feel like most of my planning happens in spreadsheets. It's easy to communicate with other members of your farm crew. And also, if you're really good at Excel, or even if you're just kind of starting out at Excel, there are a million different formulas that you can put in place to do some of that math and crop calculations for you. And once you have a spreadsheet that works really well for you and you've got it set up, and I'll show you examples of this, you just, make a new copy every year with the same formulas and rock and roll. And also, you know, Johnny Selected Seeds. I feel like I'll probably reference this a million times. But Johnny's Selected Seed Company, if you're not familiar with, but they have an incredible online kind of grower library of resources, including tools like this one, which is a harvest date calculator that helps you figure out the math between putting seeds in the ground and when you can expect your first harvest off of that crop. They also have seed need calculators that help you take, like if you want to plant carrots, for example, and you have so many bed feet, they help do the math of like how many seeds you need to purchase and when in order to meet your, you know, your yield numbers that you need. So just a little shout out for Johnny Selected Seeds. Really good resource. Yep, Garden Planner, Southern Exposure, Garden Plan Pro. I haven't looked into, that was, this PowerPoint is a little bit old, but these are just some examples of some online planners that you can utilize if that is how you like to plan. And this got a little funky, I see, but just a reminder that planning is circular, and it also just kind of is this constant never-ending cycle. We should always be looking to make continuous improvements in our planning, and always taking very, very good records. Okay, so step number one, how much money do you need to earn off of your farm? Again, we're starting with the like market first approach, like what are my like sales goals, and then working backward from there. So some really critical questions to ask yourself are, what are your living expenses, farm expenses? Is your farm, and this slide doesn't really ask it, but like, is your farm supplementing your living expenses, or is it like really gonna turn into the thing that, you know, provides for you and your family? These are questions that you should be asking yourself before you even start planning. Specifically to how much time do I have to dedicate to my farming practice? Is it 10 hours a week or is it full time? These are all important. And yeah, do you have other sources of income? For my farm, so I work for Keep Growing Detroit, but I also have my own space here in the North End neighborhood, Ambassador Fridge Farm. We have half an acre under production, and our annual sales goal is always around $5,000, which seems super modest, but it's pretty small to some, pretty big for others. But our goal every year is to make 5K, and it's worked for us. And to keep the, since I clearly have a full-time job, keep the weekly workload to about 10 or no more than 15 hours per week, which is pretty small. That's dedicated farm time outside of my normal job in order to keep Ambassador Fridge up and running. So just a little aside. Cool. Setting prices, that's definitely supposed to be part of your math. So once you have an idea of where you'd like to sell, for example, well, I'll get to that in a minute, but having an idea of what crops can be sold for what prices in your area is pretty important. That may be like a farm stand that you put up on your driveway, in which case you're figuring out what your neighborhood can bear in terms of pricing. So a little bit of price research will help you guys out. If I can put up, let me see if I can just scoot this over. Keto, is that visible?
I just see a gray square right now.
Can you see it now?
No.
Weird. Okay. Let me see.
Can you stop
Oh,
sharing
yeah,
and then just, again, when it gives you a choice, choose the one you're looking for?
got it. I see what you mean. Cool. That. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Keep it now. Cool. So this is one of those resources that we can share with you guys. So this is, if you guys aren't familiar with Grown in Detroit is our one of our programs here that helps growers in the garden resource program sell their produce in the city. So every year we create this master document, or we update this master document. This is our pricing matrix for all the crops that GID growers bring in. We can share this with you. So these are our prices for, I mean, pre-COVID, all the crops that were being sold at our stall in Eastern Market. So you'll see, yeah, like all the major crops over here, and then what they're going for. Every year, there are usually a couple increases, but this is a helpful tool to have. So this is basically what we've figured we can sell your produce for at market, in Eastern Market, which is pretty cool. Okay, let me do that again. Okay, Keto, on my back.
You are.
Cool. Okie doke. So a little bit of research, depending on where you want to sell, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so it helps to be a part of a collective, or to reach out and, you know, talk to other growers in your area and see what the markets will bear. Even more important when you start talking about selling to restaurants and vendors who typically have their own idea of what local and sustainably grown produce should be sold for. So do a little research. And of course, you can always ask us for help and support. Enterprise budget, this is kind of like this is a kind of an advanced concept, but at KGD Farm, each year, I don't know if we did it this year, but we select one or two crops that we're growing and really do a kind of a deep dive into how we were, you know, how profitable they were, and how well they were grown. So I guess we could, I was thinking, Keto, that I would kind of like move quickly past enterprise budgets, but if anyone had any questions about enterprise budgets, I guess we can get back to it. But basically,
Yeah, if you
it's
could just give it, like, you know,
yeah.
summarize what you would do for a particular, just to conceptually, to kind of tell a story about it, that would be helpful, I think.
Gotcha. Okay. So enterprise budget, it sounds a little wilder than it is, but basically it's a way of kind of double checking your planning during the season. So you're not doing a deep dive into your entire operation, but you are maybe selecting one or two crops that are either new or something you were planning on changing. Maybe you're like growing them specifically for like one market as kind of a trial, but it's a way of collecting information in the moment so that you can plan better in the future. So during the growing season, you're keeping a detailed crop journal specific for that crop. So for example, at my farm, my home farm, we grow a fair amount of carrots for the City Common CSA. We're a City Common CSA member. And in which case we're basically a contract grower. So we're expected to grow a certain amount of carrots for a certain amount of weeks, a very certain type of carrot, reliably and efficiently. So enterprise enterprise studies and enterprise budgets help us make sure that we're satisfying the commitments that we've made. So we keep track of when and where we're planting, how we're prepping the beds for those carrots, whether they needed, any kind of like interventions, mulching, fertility treatments, something like that. And then we're keeping really detailed notes on when we're harvesting, how much time we're spending harvesting, the weight of each crop, maybe some like specific like weather considerations, like, ooh, this year was like really, really dry or really wet. How did they do? And just like keeping lots and lots of notes. And then also obviously keeping notes on like what we made off of that crop and when. And then at the end of the season, we're doing a kind of profit using that information. We're determining whether or not that was a profitable crop for us and whether or not we should do it next year. So I keep saying carrots, 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 because for us, carrots are one of the most profitable crops we grow in terms of how many we can cram into our raised beds here, how little like management they need. Like it's very easy to like keep them weeded and keep bugs off of them, but actually the biggest thing is that they fetch a really high price point per unit. So they don't take a lot of time for us to get in the ground, and then they yield quite a bit of money when they come out of it. So we did an enterprise study at home and found carrots for us, carrots, tomatoes, peppers, perennial herbs, those four are bread and butter. And at this point, we've been doing it for 3 years and now we're just tweaking. So, and that enterprise budget, that like, what was the cost of input? What did we get out of it? Is the way that we were able to determine that that was the best course of action for us, which is pretty cool. So that's enterprise budget or enterprise study. Cool. New growers are, so which markets will you sell at? Like this is part of like your marketing plan. So like, for example, like Ambassador Fridge does CSA or community supported agriculture, where we work as a group to grow crops cooperatively. And then each week we get together and provide the produce for a number of boxes that go out to members of our CSA program. So no marketing, everything is, grown and already has like, it's technically already bought and paid for while it's being grown. So you're kind of no longer tied to the, like, is it going to sell? Is it not going to sell of doing a market or a farmer's market? But that's totally up to you. So CSA model, farmer's market model, farm stand at the end of your driveway. Depending on where you are in the development of your farm, these are all, awesome options. Just make sure that you have that as a goal from the start in your planning. Something to consider, which crops are most profitable? I can tell you right now at Keep Growing Detroit Farm, the most profitable crop that we grow is ginger and turmeric. Something new for us this year. Maybe some of you were aware that we had that ginger and turmeric class, and maybe some of you experimented with it this year, but depending on your yield and how you handle it, a very high value crop with very, very high demand. And if you have the space and the specific like growing environment for it, fairly profitable. But something to consider. For example, onions take, 4 months months, 5 months, 6 months to grow out and are super inexpensive. So that's an example of a crop that takes a lot of space and time to maintain and baby in a garden, but ultimately doesn't yield you very much when you go to sell it. So definitely something to consider. Outdoor kale. Mildly profitable. Most people want to buy it. It has a decent price point. And one of the easier crops to grow as well in Detroit. And I will say field tomatoes also are one of these very high yielding, very profitable crops for most growers. The only challenge is that all farmers know that. And so in August, everybody has them. So diversifying might be a good idea. Again, yep, like onions and leeks and a lot of things actually in the allium family of crops. These are very like finicky crops to grow that ultimately won't fetch a very high price point when you go to sell them. So something to consider. Also, I know very few growers in the city who are good at growing cauliflower. So it's one of these, one-off crops that people shy away from because it's really low value. However, if you're the only one at the market table in Detroit with sustainably grown cauliflower because you gave it a shot and you really figured out like a way to do it, chances are you're going to sell 100% of your cauliflower. So something to consider. Oh, and I have to, shout out to all the cut flower growers. Cut flowers in general are an excellent way to diversify. One, your garden needs pollinators in order to thrive. So having more flowers in your farm is always just a good kind of like management idea. But two, they're also very, very profitable if you're good at it in terms of the amount of space they need and also like the price point that they fetch at market. So if you can diversify and if you are going to select anything, I would very much encourage you to put in a small flower patch. And sometimes, like if you're growing for yourself, in addition to growing for market, chances are you're probably going to want some onions or some of the like lower profitability crops. No problem. Diversified farm is always good for the other metrics of like successful farm, which is like an intact ecosystem, maintaining good soil health, like encouraging native pollinators into the area. Their profitability is only one measure of a farm success. In some cases, just feeding your family and like having all your favorite foods in your backyard is also just a really good goal to have, right? So it doesn't mean everybody should be just like a ginger farmer next year. Like really think about what am I growing to sell, what am I growing to feed myself, and having a mix that satisfies all goals. How much to harvest? Oh my goodness, yes. So much. So this is really specific to like a CSA program. I don't know if I'm going to dwell too much on this slide. I'm going to keep moving. Okay. Next step.
Molly, can we pause for 1 second?
Oh yeah, go for it.
How is everybody doing? Do we have any questions so far? I haven't really been seeing much in the chat, and we've been covering, I think it's a lot of information for if you're not familiar. So I just wanted to get a sense if anybody had any questions thus far. Okay. Let's keep going.
Cool. So for the next several slides, it's really going to be focused on like the CSA scheduling. and not necessarily market. I apologize for that. With a CSA program, really the control over, it's totally up to the farmer what's going in those boxes. And it does mean that it's one of the easiest farm plans to put together, because you've guaranteed to all of your CSA members that they're going to get a box of produce, but what's in that box is for the most part up to you. And it's a model that I really, really appreciate. So you've guaranteed a certain value in the box, but it gives you a lot of flexibility around what crops make up that value. So setting up your harvest schedule. This includes like, when do I anticipate setting up my, so if I'm gonna like break away from the CSA model, when do I want to start marketing and when do I want to end? Some folks might want to only do, especially if you're just starting out, to think about planning around like peak season when everything is, growing and things are starting to mature. So like, if you're just starting out, focusing on like main season crops like tomatoes and peppers and greens and eggplant and what have you for July, August, and September is not a bad way to go. If you are in the position to have, season extension or a high tunnel and you want to focus on early season crops versus fall season crops, that's important to know, obviously. And if you have a high tunnel, you really know that like that's what you're going to focus on. But at this point, you need to, if you know you're going to do a CSA or you know that you're going to do like a farmer's market or like a market stand, figuring out those dates and when you want to start and end those marketing opportunities is really important. And whether or not you're going to do that once a week or twice a week or once a month, starting to add that detail is critical. And if you are going to have a CSA program, how many people, how many shares? So for example, KGD has a 100 member CSA program. City Commons has 60 or 70 members in their CSA program. So that's 100 or 70 boxes going out a week. So something to consider.
Molly,
Yeah.
there's a question, if you can talk about it now or when when it's appropriate, but there was just some questions around flowers, like if you were going down that path, do you have any resources or like what type of flowers are you talking about? I mean,
Totally.
it is like at some point, maybe at the end, I could come full circle that if that's easier.
Okay. Let me.
Why don't we do that? I'll bring it up at the end. Just keep it on. We'll just keep going where you're at.
Cool. Yep. And my farm did vegetables this year, but for the past 4 years, we've actually been a cut flower farm. So I do have a lot of resources for you. And so does KGD.
Dahlias and zinnias is the question. Good one.
Zinnias?
Are dahlias and zinnias good? Yes.
Yeah, dahlias, no. If I had to, if you're doing cut flower production, this is my 10-second breakdown of cut flower production. If you're gonna focus on 3 crops for cut flower production that are easy and also put together a solid $10 bouquet like every year and are, generally really easy to grow, zinnias, any of them, Benneries, giant mix, sunflowers, and cosmos. Together, you can make a bouquet. They have a really long like flowering window. They're depending on the sunflower, they can be cut and come again, so you get multiple harvests off of them. They're great. Also, some of the longer stem marigolds, which I feel like a lot of people have experience with. Those are some really good kind of like entry level cut flowers. And they're also seeds that traditionally Keep Growing Detroit has offered up to members of the Garden Resource Program. So chances are you're going to get one or a couple of those seed varieties next season in the main crop GRP distro. So that's my 2 cents.
And then there was the question, there's been a few people asking, like, this seems mostly focused on market gardening, and if are you going to have some stuff relatable for family gardens, do you think, or is this all right? And that's just, it is what you have. So just if you could answer that question.
Gotcha. It is geared more towards, like, this portion specifically is geared more towards market gardens because of the math involved. But when we get into creating like a planting detail and talking about projections, I feel like that is something that everybody can get on board with. Because even if you have a couple raised beds in your backyard, it's just a good idea to like keep a record of when you put it in the ground, and how much you got out of it that year. So the following year, if you put 4 times the amount of tomatoes in that your family or your neighbors were able to absorb, maybe next season you tweak it a little bit, and then suddenly you have extra space to like try a different crop or add something else that you suddenly have space for. So
Right.
does that make sense?
Yep, that's exactly what I was looking for. I think that helps. So
Cool.
hang tight, folks, we'll get there.
Sweet. Cool. Couple resources for quantity calculations. This is for folks who say, I need to crank out 60 units a week for 2 weeks, or 6 weeks, of a certain crop. I believe you guys will have access to this PowerPoint, so I'll let you kind of like go into that on your own time if that is relevant to your growing practices. Same with this. This is absolutely something that, market growers need to, keep in mind. How, if you need to crank out, arugula, beets, and what have you, once you know how many units you need to produce in which weeks, you work backwards and then turn that into the amount of space on your farm that you need to reserve for planting all of those things. And this is, this is actually the person who put together this PowerPoint is the author of Sustainable Market Farming. And this chart right here is in the book. It's all based off of projections for a 100-member CSA program. So it's a really good kind of reference for people who are thinking about doing a CSA. Cool, more resources on yield. And at this point, let's see, gotcha. Yield projections are something that even small growers have access to. So at this point, like if we were in person, I would have given you guys all a copy of the Johnny Selected Seed catalog. In the front of the catalog is information on how, on crop yields by crop. So per 100 feet of bed space, how many pounds of a certain crop you can expect to yield off of that space. That's really important. Like, for example, 100 feet of carrots should yield you about 140, 150 pounds of carrots when it's all said and done. And for all of you like home gardeners, we usually give you like 10 feet worth of carrot seeds, I believe. So that should be somewhere around like 15 pounds of carrots out of that pack of seeds. That information, I don't believe would be on like your garden resource program, like pack of seeds that we give you at our distros. But something like the Johnny Seed catalog would be able to give you those yield projections. And again, yield projection is just the number of pounds expected when that plant is finally matured. Really important for market gardeners to be able to anticipate what they're going to be able to sell. But for the home gardener, kind of interesting just to key into how much food the seeds that we give you or the seeds that you buy for yourself actually turns into, which is pretty cool. For example, one tomato plant, I think we give you guys, you know, like beefsteak tomatoes. You can expect to yield off of one tomato plant something like 15 to 20 pounds minimum of fruit over the course of its growing season. So something to consider. Gotcha. So step 6. So once you have, sorry. And at this point, this is going to be tricky, but I wanted to toggle between a couple things. So let me see if I can pull up my other spreadsheet. Just a second. Sorry about this. Keto, are there any other questions while I'm getting this?
No, not thus far, but we can open it up to questions. If you want to jot any questions into the chat while Molly's doing a little transition here, even if it's off topic, I can maybe help a little bit while we're doing a little transition. Or we can just wait 1 second.
Sorry about that. Okie dokie. Because I want to pull up and it's just being slow. I'm sorry, guys. An example planting plan. It's just taking me a minute.
Okay, so there's a few questions.
Okay.
Is there a good resource for things that should not grow next to each other?
Ooh. A good resource. Yeah, actually, I have a book here behind me. I have a lot of books in my bedroom. Yes, and also I would say if growers aren't already used to or aware of the library of resources at the Michigan State Extension website, that would be a really great place to start. So MSU Extension has an incredible library of a lot of the things we're talking about, planting dates, regional planting dates on their website. So that would be a great place. Keto, do you have an idea?
Well, I mean, it's kind of, even though it's the opposite, it's kind of like related to the topic of what are companion plants. So
Sorry, yep.
I
But they
think,
would also have that.
right. So I think there's a book called Carrots Love Tomatoes. That might be a good resource. That's the one that comes to mind. And then a few other questions here. I have leftover seeds from 2020. Can I use them in 2021? Yes, you can. Generally speaking, seeds can be usable, you know, year after year, but they will, well, first off, be sure and store them in a cool, dark, dry place as best as possible. That'll extend their viability and lifespan, but they will generally, as time goes on, the viability of those seeds will diminish. So you might plant a little more than you want, and with the expectation that the germination won't be as great. And then next question, tomatoes, I pruned mine this year. Is this a good idea? Less tomatoes, I think. So we always prune our tomatoes at the farm. And there's basically the concept is to try and encourage um, less like leafy and leaf and stem growth and more fruit growth. And there's a basically you're pinching out what's called suckers. So if you probably the easiest thing under these circumstances if you just Google suckering tomatoes, there's tons of video resources on that, and you can get some visuals on how that works. And then Gail's got a really good question. Can your garden be part profitable and part charitable? I would say definitely.
For sure.
You have it just it's basically the concept here of figuring out what you want that profit to be, and just figuring out a model for that. Um, will you be talking about discussing rotation?
Yep,
Okay.
actually, right now. Definitely. Let me make this screen share again. Sorry.
And then there's some questions about besides garlic, what are good winter crops?
Ooh, gotcha. Um, and that is okay. So I'm hearing crop rotation. I'm hearing winter crop rotation. We're going to cover in just a second,
Okay,
and
great.
then winter crops. And I assume like when winter crops, you mean crops that go in the fall and then are harvested in the spring, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
she said yeah.
garlic, got it. Um, garlic is a really good one. And if you don't have any cover, garlic is really your best bet. Um, oddly enough, if you're interested in putting cut flowers into your rotation next year, bulb planting in the spring, or bulb planting, excuse me, in the fall. So right now is something that you can put in and then sell, and be basically, you know, your first sale in April, which is a pretty cool thing. So if you have the ability to be flexible around like tulips or narcissus or something like that, it's not a food crop, but it is still something that is definitely marketable and gives you a little bit of income in the very, very early season. So yeah, and garlic absolutely is a really good overwinter crop. Some people have success overwintering leeks. And I'm trying to think of other things. Keto, do you have any suggestions other than that?
Well, I mean, I always say spinach is, regardless, like if we have a mild winter, then spinach is gonna do pretty good. I mean, spinach is kind of our um poster child
Yeah,
for winter growing. But in terms of starting anything now, I mean, the window's more or less closed at this point for planting anything that's going to actively grow it or stay alive at this point in the season.
yeah,
You could sow the spinach now or lettuce now or at any point, like maybe even really early spring, with the intention of it as soon as the days get long enough in February that it'll start to pick up again. So, if you got the space, experiment with lettuce and spinach either now or, earlier in February. Um, so, actually, if you check out, we kind of go into that more in depth in the class we do on season extension. That there's a video on our YouTube channel you can check out that we put together back in September.
cool.
Okay, you ready to move on?
I think so. Yeah. Can everybody see this thing that looks like boxes?
Yep.
Okay, so take a little break. And now I'm just going to show you two examples of planting plans, and to the best of my ability, show you where I track down the information in order to create these planting plans and planting details. Okay. Again, normally this is like a bunch of pieces of paper that are in front of you. So I apologize that I'm having a hard time toggling between it all. So what you see in front of you is is the Keep Growing Detroit Farm planting plan. And the planting plan,
Can you zoom out a
one
little?
is, yeah, let me see if I can view, oh my gosh, zoom. We're gonna do it. Nah, okay. I mean, it's gonna be a little slow, sorry guys. So what you're looking at, all those boxes, those tiny boxes, if you can imagine each one of those boxes, the really small gray ones, is 1 square foot. You're looking at the outdoor planting space and all the beds at KGD Farm. So this was kind of like our number one step in terms of the process when we got to the new farm in Eastern Market, was to create an accurate map of all the planting spaces in the fields. So you can see, like, this is field 2, this is 3, these numbers have changed since then, 4, 5, and 6. And each little box is a square foot, and each of these long strips is a bed. So this gives us the ability to label and place crops in specific beds. So we came up with codes for all of these beds. Instead of just saying it's going to go over there, we get to say it's going in field 2, bed 1, which we know is this many feet long by this many feet wide. So I encourage you all to have a really good map of your growing space. And even if it is a couple of raised beds, it's a really good idea to give those beds a label. So, you know, east bed, north bed, south bed, because when it comes time to rotate your crops around, you'll want to keep track of what year you planted, you know, tomatoes in what bed, so that you can rotate them around. So the first part of the planting plan is having a really good map, and then field rotation. So at KGD Farm, we don't plant the same crop families in the same fields year to year. This helps us maintain and kind of, you know, reinvigorate the soils in between plantings. Not all crops, you know, take the same amount of macro and micronutrients out of the soil with them. So we have what we call heavy feeders, tomatoes and eggplant and nightshades and squashes that take a lot out of the soil, getting rotated around, and followed by, you know, light feeders like lettuces and greens, so that the soil gets a little bit of a break in between, you know, years. So what we've done, you'll see, like, we keep records back a couple of years just in case we forget some stuff. So we've got 2019, 20, 21, 22. This is forecasting. The other sheet that's not on here has all the history on it. And you'll see that we've got each one of the fields labeled on the left here. So field 1, all the beds, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then you'll see that, like, for example, that garlic, the purple, jumps from field 1 to field 3 to field 4 year after year. So it's jumping around, and it's being followed by a family of crops behind it that either gives the soil a rest or can handle, you know, whatever's left over after the garlic left the field. Does that make sense? You know, there are a lot of resources for folks on, like, how to structure your crop rotations and what follows what. We just weren't going to get too into it for this class. That's really kind of like a, you know, a soils specific topic. But yes, it's important, and even if you have a small garden, it's important to keep track of as part of your crop planning. Cool. Let me zoom this back in. Okie dokie. So for KGD Farm, the next step is the planting overview. So this document, or this part of the document, comes from our marketing information. So for example, if we know that we want tomatoes and carrots for the CSA, and we know that the CSA is going to run, June, July, August, September, we plug in those crops on the calendar, and then we structure our planting schedule around that. So let's see. So you can see there's just a ton of information, but basically up on top are the weeks of the year. This black bar is our last frost date, which is really important to note. And then this black bar is the first frost date. And those are kind of the bookends of our season. So anything that exists on this side of that bar is a early season crop that will most likely need cover or to be grown in a high tunnel. And anything on this side of this bar is something that is also probably under some sort of cover in the field or in a high tunnel or a heated environment. So really important to have all of that information out there in a way that you can keep track of. So this gives us kind of a big overview of where things are going and when, and in what bed. So you'll see over on the left, there's all of our planting spaces. And it's just a ton of detail. Should I zoom in?
Yeah, there's a request to zoom in.
Cool.
Is this something that we'll be able to share, Molly?
Yeah, oh yeah. Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. Cool. Because here are the details. So what we did, for example, where's a good example? Here we go. And this is, we plant multiple crops in the same space during a year. So you'll see like, the green is a spring crop. It's being followed by a main season crop in red. And then that same planting area is being finished out with a third crop. This makes a lot of sense if you're market gardening because your aim is to like maximize your productivity in a certain space. If you're a family garden, chances are that you are planting mostly main season crops and maybe when they come out or they finish something after it to finish out the end of the season. I want to encourage more, family gardeners to do stuff like that. For example, summer squash, like here's summer squash that's being, seeded indoors. It's being planted out before in the field in a covered environment before the last frost date. It's coming out in the middle or towards the end of the summer. And then it's being followed by spinach, which means that we're getting 2 crops out of that space instead of 1. It's a good idea. But if you guys are going to be taking this document and kind of digesting it on your own, there are a couple keys here. If it says TP, it's being transplanted. So like started indoors or in a basement or under grow lights inside on that date. And then once you see the crop name, it's actually going in the ground, in the planting space. And then all of those H's over, a period of time, for example, these peppers, the peppers are going in the ground on a date, and then the H's are the harvest window. So unlike cabbages, which are a one-off crop, you grow them, you harvest them, and they're done. Things like peppers and tomatoes, which have longer harvest windows, are marked in here with like multiple H's that tell you how long they'll be in production. I know that's probably going to create a million questions, but that's the overview. And even if you're doing, I want to grow tomatoes, 4 plants, kale, 5 plants, carrots, and spinach, taking the time to gather all the information on those crops. And then what I've done in the past is just take tomato. I wish I had an example of this, but if you're growing 5 crops in your raised bed garden, grab 5 index cards and then put the crop name and the crop variety, and then put the amount of space each one of those plants needs. So for example, like, plant tomatoes 2 feet apart if they need 4 square feet, or if they need 3 square inches, put that on the card, put down when they get planted, and when they get harvested, and then take those 4 or 5 index cards and just lay them out on a table based on their season. And you have technically just created a farm plan that tells you where they're going to go, in what order. And that's one way. Before I got used to spreadsheets, I used to actually just like write out all that information on index cards and kind of shuffle it around on my table, and kind of place them, in their place. And then that was my farm plan. So there are really simple ways of doing this. And it's scalable to what size, garden you're in, if that makes sense. Cool. This is a lot, but a little bit more. I will share this as well. This is the planting detail. So now we're talking about what information you need to gather about those crops and when you want to plant them in order to generate something like a harvest projection for a market gardener. So this is all the information. And when you're just starting out, I encourage you to maybe write down more information than you think you need. So for example, on this, we have, these are the categories that I highly recommend you like write down when you're starting. So let's grab this. Well, we'll do garlic. Okay, I like garlic. Okie dokie. So crop and variety for whatever it is that you're going to grow next year. Very important. The crop, the variety, where it came from. So if you bought it, or if you grew it yourself and saved seeds, just keeping tabs of the seed source. Days to maturity. So DTM, or days to maturity, is a really, really important number to know. It's on every seed packet that you buy. It's also on the seed packets that Keep Growing Detroit gives you when you pick up your distro. This is the number of days it takes for that seed to go from a seed to a mature edible plant. Really important to write that down, because that's going to, again, if I'm going to garlic is in the ground. Garlic takes all of this time to mature, and then it's harvested way over here. So the days to maturity is this blank area where it's just sitting in the ground and you're just waiting for it to come around and be edible. So days to maturity is really, really important to write down. And this box right here has to do with appropriate plant spacing. So garlic, for example, needs 6 to 8 inches spacing, and we put 4 rows in each one of our 30-inch beds. And then this spreadsheet, which I will share with you, has a bunch of formulas in it that crank out how many total plants, right here, number of seeds plants needed, how many heads of garlic we're putting in the ground at this spacing. And then this next section has to do with how much garlic seed we need in order to plant that amount of space. It's another, just there's a formula in that box. This also tells us, based off those days to maturity, that we should expect to have garlic coming out and be marketable around week 26, which is the second week in July, I'm pretty sure. And then more and more math tells us the yield potential, which is pretty cool. And Keto, I want to transition to Johnny's. It's just going to take me a sec to do that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Time check, you're at about 2:15.
Totally. Any questions? Lots.
I've been getting, they've been just like kind of not direct stuff. So I've been just answering questions as necessary.
Cool.
But if there's any more questions that we want to ask in the meantime, please jot them in the chat.
Let's see. Okie dokie.
Ashley said, I think I have been crop rotating wrong. Do you have a question about that? Or do you think you got it clarified by what Molly was saying? How is it supposed to go? Is the question.
Crop rotating?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
You want me to take it while you're focusing on that?
Yeah, I was good. There's a whole science to that. Absolutely. Yes, please take it.
Okay. So I mean, crop rotation there's a number of ways to do it. The basic concept of crop rotation is to not plant the same thing in the same spot year after year, because that particular crop is taking certain nutrients out of the ground and they're slowly diminishing it. So there are a number of different recommendations of like what comes after this and what comes after that. And on a small scale, it can get, especially if you're just a few raised beds in the backyard, it can get really complicated, maybe unnecessarily. Particularly if you're adding fertility if you're adding compost on a regular basis. Basically, farmers on a large scale, they need to do these rotations because they don't have the ability to add lots of compost in a particular field always to address any fertility that would have been lost for a crop. So that becomes even more crucial for them. But on our smaller scale, we have the ability, because it's such a small area, to add nutrients. So I think the short of it is it should just don't plant the same thing in the same spot every year. The other piece of that would be to learn a little bit more about what are heavy feeders and light feeders. And there's definitely resources out there. Ashley's talking about her rotation here is tomatoes to cabbages to beans to roots. So that's heavy feeder, moderate feeder, beans are technically something that's adding fertility, and then root crops. So again, like I think I would, that'd be the short summary, is like, just as long as you're not doing the same thing in the same spot every year. There's a few general recommendations. Molly, I don't know if you want to speak to that anymore or add anything to what I said.
Sounds good. I feel like I probably have a resource here in my library that I could share, or at the very least, like this example of a crop rotation, and maybe another one that kind of explains the science of it a little bit better. So I'm pretty sure I just have like a handout type version of, best practice that we could share after this class.
Okay. At the end.
Yep.
Okay.
Cool. Just a note about yield and where I got that number from. Another shout out to Johnny Selected Seeds, but on their website they have, it's a little tricky if you're growing a small amount of crops in your garden because you have to kind of like divide by quite a bit, but they have, this is the direct seeded vegetable crops chart. They have a version of this for transplants too, transplanted crops like tomatoes and kale and cabbage and what have you. But for example, if I keep using carrots, but if I'm putting carrots in the ground at a certain density, I can expect roughly 100, like I said earlier, 150 pounds out of, you see up here, 100 feet. And this is row feet, not bed feet. So a single line of carrots, not like, you know, a whole, you know, 4 rows per, you know, 1 foot. No, like this is carrots planted to an appropriate density in a single line. If I've got 100 feet of that single row, I can expect 150 pounds. So for example, if you're doing 10 feet of carrots, you can expect 15 pounds. And if you're only doing 5 feet, that's 7.5 pounds. So is this resource geared towards market gardeners or large scale farmers? Yes, but that doesn't mean that there isn't information here that the home scale gardener can't glean too. So just a shout out to Johnny Selected Seeds. That's where we got our yield, potential yield numbers from. Now I'm going to go back to this. Okay, so we've got information on the crop. Days to maturity is plugged in for most of these things, not garlic. Information on spacing, information on how much seed we need in order to plant that amount of space, when it's going to come out of the ground. This is all formula based. And finally, yield projection. So this is all based off of the number of pounds per bed feet. And at this point, some of this stuff is just from growing it at KGV Farm for so many years and weighing it out. Like some of these numbers are tailored to our growing practices, not the Johnny's calculator. So we know at this point we're getting 1/10 of a pound per foot of garlic, and math. We're getting roughly 30 pounds out of each of our beds, which are 85 feet long. And I will share this with you and you can play with it. So that is how we end up with yield in terms of pounds. Can you see it? Can everyone see the chart? Someone just said that they can't see it.
You're not on the screen. It's just your face right now. Not that.
Oh, apologies. Okay, hold on. Whoa.
Sorry, I was waiting for a.
Oh no, that's cool. I'm like pointing to stuff. Sorry. Okay, here we go. So can you see it now?
Yep.
Okay, so what I was saying is, so on the spreadsheet, I've got, you know, the name and variety of the crop we're growing, days to maturity, spacing requirements. These are all things that are available on seed packets or in seed catalogs. And then this right here is information on the size of the growing space. So for example, our beds are 85 feet long up to 112 feet long. This math spits out how much seed garlic we need. This math spits out based off of when we put it in the ground, when we expect to harvest it for the first time. And then taking numbers from the Johnny's yield chart, we can anticipate, we know about 1/10 of a pound per bed foot of garlic to come out of it. And then math, we can expect about 30 pounds of garlic out of each one of these beds. And that's yield in terms of pounds. Once we have yield in terms of pounds, this spreadsheet is really good at plugging in the price. So in this column, I'm adding from the KGD, that pricing document that I showed you earlier, what we can sell a pound of garlic for. And then finally, we're getting to how much money we can anticipate making off of that garlic once we sell it, and assuming that we sell 100% of it. So lots of info. I'm sure you have a ton of questions. This will, drive you nuts if you stare at it too long. But this is per crop, a really good way to have an idea of what you're putting in the ground and ultimately what's coming out and how much money you anticipate making and when. And all it takes really is really good data collection up front. So reading your seed packets really well, understanding your resources, for example, yield calculators on the Johnny's website, and also like pricing information for like local markets. So combining all of that information on something like a spreadsheet, if you're comfortable, or, back of the napkin, if like that's how you do, is really going to help you out and give you some ideas to what's coming down the pike for next season. And this spreadsheet even has at the top of it, it takes all of that total dollars and spits out for me total yield in terms of money and pounds if we were to plant everything like we said we would on this planting detail, which is pretty cool. Cool. I'm sure there are tons of questions there, but I'm gonna grab this. Cool. Can everybody see that? Can you see that, Keto?
Yep.
Okay. So here's mine. This is the Ambassador Fridge planting detail. It's similar, but I don't like spreadsheets as much. So it's kind of like all on one document. So here on the left, I like seeing everything across, on one page. I'm really visual. So over on this side is all the same information that's on the other one. What crop, the variety. I've even included in here is what crop family, so that informs my crop rotation, whether it's organic or not, information on how it's sown, and my transplant and planting dates. And then instead of having it on 2 tabs, I have right here a snapshot of my season, with brown being, when it's seeded, and green when it's growing, and just trying to simplify it as much as possible. Honestly, like when I started out, I didn't really think too much about like, and this was a mistake, but like I didn't think about like money at the end of it. I thought about just like cramming as much into my season as possible and then figuring it out. So I spent a lot of time just kind of, packing the season full of plant options in the farm. So this is another way of, creating that crop detail all on one page. And then over here, this gray box was where I was going to keep tabs on when I actually put stuff in the ground and what I actually yielded. It's a good idea to remember to keep notes during the season, so that you can, if you said that you were going to plant something on May 12th, but it wasn't, until you didn't end up doing it until the end of May, those are good notes to keep and not lose track of, so that you can incorporate them into next year's planning. So that's another example of a planting plan that I can also share with you, so you guys can check it out. Okie dokie. Sorry, it's so much toggling around. Okie dokie. So we've kind of already covered this, but so critical pieces, find the number of days to maturity from the catalog, right? Work backwards from your target harvest date if you're a market gardener and you know when you need to harvest stuff because you have a CSA program or a wholesale commitment. If you're a family garden and you're just, you know, growing and then you're going to figure out somewhere to sell it, you can do the reverse. You can start with when is the best time to plant it and then come up with your anticipated harvest date. Both ways are fine. Unfortunately, this presentation is geared towards market gardeners, but already explained it. But yeah, days to maturity is the time it takes for a crop to become marketable. Deciding whether to sow or transplant, individual choices. You know, it's an added cost if you're going to buy transplants or contract Keep Growing Detroit to, you know, grow them out for you. But it could technically be a cost savings if you grow your own transplants out. If there's just more planning involved. Feel like we already kind of understand the direct seeding pros and cons. One, it's faster, it's in the ground. Two, you're not dealing with, you know, a closed environment or an artificial environment like, you know, your basement or starting them, you know, in your kitchen window. Sometimes transplants are more finicky to get, you know, out into the garden. For example, squash, they don't really transplant very well, like winter squash, something to consider. The con is that, you know, when you direct seed something, oftentimes you have to go back and thin it before it gets too big, and that could impact your yield and also how much money you're spending on seeds. Am I going in the right direction? That's just a lot of information on. Okay. Field planting schedule. You just saw two examples of field planting schedules. So I feel like we've already covered this. This is just another example, like the other two I showed you, of how people took all their crop information, where it's being planted, how dense, and then based on the days to maturity and the first and last frost dates, added to it this column of when it's going to go in the ground or when it's going to be started as a transplant inside. When to sow transplants? Actually, this was the one thing I don't have a copy of, but electronically. But Keep Growing Detroit in the spring creates the it's called the Sow Your Garden doc, right, Keto? It's what goes with garden resource program members when they pick up their seeds.
Plan your garden, but yeah.
Plan your garden doc. Plan your garden doc. And that is something that's available to all of you guys starting, I think, in like February. So it'll be available on the website. And on the back of that document, we've actually tailored, we've kind of like demystified this a bit. So on the back of the document is in two parts, when best to start transplants indoors and dates, and also when best to sow certain crops directly in the ground outside. I just don't have a copy of it right here available for you guys to see. That information is specific to your region. So Detroit is a little different in our dates and times than other parts of southeastern Michigan. Do you have something to add, Keto?
I shared the link.
Oh, okay, cool. And also a lot of this is available on this information on when to sow and when to transplant is available on the seed packets when you buy them or in seed catalogs when you're leafing through things. It'll say best if transplanted or best if direct sown. So keep tabs on that information too. You know, keep it in your record somewhere. For example, at KGD, we start our tomato transplants a full 8 weeks prior to the last frost date. That gives them a really awesome start to the season. It's a little more labor intensive, obviously, but it means that we're able to have higher yields over a longer period of time. Seeding schedules, same day or same deal. We actually at KGD have, I take our planting plan and extract from it a separate transplanting schedule that just informs when we start things inside. Sometimes it's nice to have a separate transplanting schedule if you anticipate having a lot of transplants. Or for example, one of your products is like packs of baby plants that you plan on selling at market. Having a separate transplanting schedule will help you, well, for one, figure out how much indoor growing space you need in order to, you know, keep them happy, either in your kitchen or your basement or under some lights. But we have one at KGD and I have one at my own farm too. And these guys put the placing all of this on a map last. I actually tend to place the crops first based off of our crop rotation. But once you know what you're growing, how much you want to grow, and when, then you have to place them somewhere in your garden. So this person's very nicely hand-drawn map is a little hard to read, but they have, you know, all of their crops placed in a space. And you saw on the KGD planting plan, the rotation, that each one of those fields is already dedicated to a certain crop family. And then depending on the amount of space we need to grow, it's either a full bed of carrots or 2 full beds of carrots or half a bed of carrots. But either way, making sure that you have a location ID or like a bed name next to each one of those crops so that you know physically where they're all going to go is really important. You can either start there, like this is where I grow tomatoes and I always grow tomatoes and that's totally fine. Or if you, like us, march them around the field year to year, just keeping tabs on and labeling where things go is really important. We've already talked about crop spacing, but we know that each crop has a different spacing requirement based on how big it is and whether it likes to have neighbors when it's mature. This information is available on seed packets and also, you know, online and in seed catalogs. And this is just way more information than we're going to go into, but this is exactly what I just said. Information on how to optimize your crop spacing in your raised beds or in your field. Gotcha. And also just someone said, which plants can I not grow together? There are definitely some crops that do not like being next to other crops, but this slide focuses on intercropping or, you know, stacking multiple crops in the same growing space. For example, this year in KGD farm, we planted tomato fields or our tomato beds with tomatoes down the middle in a single line, but on either side of those tomatoes, we also planted radishes and beets and greens. which means that each one of those beds was yielding significantly more than it would had it been, just a single crop. And also it was fairly successful. The tomatoes, while they were getting established and growing out, left plenty of space on either side of that bed for radishes. So we did 2 rows of radishes on either side of those tomatoes. So the tomatoes are growing out. The radishes, which are a very short turnaround, they're only 30 to 40 days, DTM, days to maturity. The radishes grew up and were harvested. And then right behind them, the tomatoes started to grow up and start get harvested. So we got 2 crops out of the same bed. And they didn't outcompete each other. They, it was a good intercropping. And I don't know, we have separate classes on season extension, but season extension allows you to, obviously expand your seasons, into the early spring and the later fall. So strategic use of things like row cover will expand your planting windows a little bit, maybe a couple weeks on either side, which for a market gardener is a huge deal. And even for a family garden, if you're able to cover one of your beds for those late fall plantings, that means you're just going to have more salad mix and kale and root vegetables later in the season for your family. But you want to make sure that on your crop plan that is reflected. So if you have the ability to extend your season, and you can give those plants a little bit longer planting window, just make sure that you're reflecting that in your plan. And you'll see on the KGD planting plan, there are certain crops that have a little season extension addendum that says we get 2 extra weeks out of this actually, and that helps inform our yield numbers. We're getting way more kale than we would if we didn't have season extension. Succession crops are a whole other thing, but especially for quick crops like lettuces or head lettuce, we can sow multiple rounds in a growing period in order to make sure that we have those crops for a longer period of time. So for example, if you want to have head lettuce for more than just a day, right? You plant 1 head of lettuce and you cut it and it's gone. But if you want head lettuce 3 times a week for a month, then you're going to have to stagger those plantings so that you have the same amount maturing week to week to week. I think I've got a good example of this here. Okie dokie. So going back to this planting plan. Didn't pick it up. Keto, can you see it?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Let me zoom back in. Whoa, too much. Sorry. Okay. Way too much. Okie dokie. So, lots of info. Sorry. Need to make it even smaller. There's my example. So you can see down here in the broccoli field, an example of that. So broccoli is a one-off crop, right? You get some side shoots, but mostly you're looking for like that nice tight head that's marketable. So what we've done in the past is you'll see we have 1, 2, 3 rounds of broccoli that are being transplanted 2 weeks apart right here. And then they're going in the ground 2 weeks apart in different beds. You'll see this is bed 7, 8, and 9, or 8, 9, and 10. And then you'll see that the harvest windows are staggered. So instead of having, 2 weeks of broccoli, we now have 9 weeks of broccoli, 3 separate plantings. And that is kind of the essence of, of stagger plantings. Succession plantings, rather. Okay, stop share. And in addition to that, I mean, I feel like lettuces and beets and cabbage and carrots, I've seen more creative uses of space in smaller gardens. Smaller spaces are easier to manage. And if you have the ability to sneak some lettuce in underneath your tomatoes, or, in a kind of a shady spot where they're kind of helping each other, where the lettuce is keeping the soil cool and benefiting from the shade of the tomato, and isn't, susceptible to the same pest species, like you can kind of sneak more crops into smaller spaces than you would think. Nope. That was all succession planning information. I just wanted to point out for succession planting, if you're not going to get super fancy with it, which is totally fine, one way to get your feet wet with succession planning is kind of the like no paperwork, but like kind of the like I see it and therefore I do it mentality, which is sow your next round when there are visual cues from the other crops in your garden that it might be ready to sow more lettuce. So sow more lettuce when the previous sowing germinates, so that they'll be roughly about 2 weeks staggered. So if you're like me and you don't always have time to look at your paper or electronic records, sometimes, you can train yourself to just watch for the crops out there to tell you when it's time to plant other things. So just a reminder about that. So like I do things like that in my own garden, where once I see that the lettuce or the salad mix is 1 inch tall, I sow my next round, and that roughly gives me a succession planting interval that I need. Cool. And the next step, oops, is to go back and edit. Look at your crop plan overview, make sure that there aren't any weirdnesses in your math. Check timings of seedlings. One of the big things is talk to other growers about what worked for them. If they were able to get away with, planting them a week early or a week later, or, checking in with your network of growers can help inform your farm plan too. And also labor requirements are something that people don't often, keep tabs on until they're looking at them all together. But having all of this information in one spot makes it really obvious when you're going to be super busy and when you're maybe going to be less busy. And if, it's easier to make those tweaks when you're looking at it on paper in December than in July, and you're trying to make these decisions on the fly, and suddenly you have a ton of crops and a lot of stuff that you need to offload, and you didn't necessarily think about planning for that volume.
Quick question, Molly.
Yeah.
In terms of succession, could you speak to there's a question about lettuce and doing successions of lettuce and what to do, like when working around the summer months, like knowing getting to the bottom of heat problems with lettuce in the summer.
Gotcha. Couple strategies. One, you can take a break from lettuce. If you have the ability to take a break from lettuce, July is kind of the time to do that. And focus more on the shoulder seasons of the spring and fall. If you need lettuce in the summer, it's 2020 and a lot of seed companies have created more heat tolerant varieties of lettuce. So they tend to be a little bit more expensive because there's a lot of science that goes into them. But that's an option. So either work around the heat by planting at different times, purchase those varieties that can withstand heat. My next one is go for like a lettuce analog or something like a leafy green that does handle the heat and can kind of like satisfy the same market need. Trying to think of an example off the top of my head. I just had it in my head and it's gone. Sorry about that. And then also ways to create artificial shade. For example, like other plants that are taller, maybe creating shadier, cooler spaces for you already in your garden. And if you're a small scale gardener who, for example, has a lot of really tall tomatoes or a lot of, another spot that receives a little bit more shade and is a little bit cooler, move the lettuce to those spaces or plan to have lettuce in those spaces during that time of the year. And then there are ways of creating shade with, shade cloth and what have you too. At KGD Farm, we tend to back off of salad mixes in the summer and then start our program again in August. So that's been our workaround.
Okay.
And pretty much finally, keep good records in the moment. It's hard to do, but even if you keep a little notepad on you or in your pack shed or in your kitchen or on your refrigerator, after you harvest or after you plant, make sure you're keeping good records, quick notes once a week, something like that, so that you have that information to draw upon at the end of the season when you go to create this farm plan. It's really hard to do paperwork in the main season, but I've taken to actually just sending myself text messages in the field because my phone's always on me. So I'll text myself like, today I planted carrots, this many, or like today the aphids showed up, or today we sold this many pounds of this crop. Any way that works for you, just make sure that you're keeping records during the growing season too. Resources. And again, you guys will get a copy of this, but tons of resources.
Great.
That's a lot.
Yeah, a lot of information. This has been really awesome, Molly. Thank you. We're going to open it up to questions at this point. Patrick had a question. Where's Patrick's question? Are there benefits to tilling soil now, or should I wait until early spring? Your thoughts?
Ooh. I know this. Because I remember we did this we had this conversation for another farm. That depends on the level of soil work, I'll say. If you're doing a ton of earth moving, like plowing, or, so I guess it depends on if you're just rototilling, so if you're only doing like the first couple of inches, you can do it now. And actually, you can definitely do it now. And then have your growing spaces ready to go in the spring. Give them a good cover or like a mulch over the winter just to protect them. But I found that if you're doing like really heavy earthwork, like for example, breaking new ground, um, plowing, flipping soil, getting rid of sod is a really, really good idea to, in my opinion, to start doing that work in the fall so that that has the ability to, some of those weeds and the things that you kick up have the ability to break down and compost over the winter, and kind of let the soil structure settle back down. Um, it also tends to be really, really wet in the spring, which makes some of the like really intense like soil work really damaging to your soils in the spring. So I would say if you have the ability, you know, September, well, October is a really good time to be doing soil work and heavy soil work. And then in the spring, you can do it again. But again, you're probably limited by good like dry windows, like when you can get in there and it's not too wet. Um, but yes, you can do it now. There's a long-winded.
Hey, that was great.
Okay.
Okay. Any more questions that people want to answer? Um, yeah, like, so just to review, we are going to be sharing um, slides that Molly went through today. We're going to be sharing the GID produce price list and an example planting plan. So I'll probably be working on that at the beginning of the week. We can get that information all gathered together. I'll ask Molly to share that with me, and then we'll make sure and get it out to you. Okay. Well, if I don't see any more comments or questions, so I think we're going to leave it there. And sounds good. Thanks. You're welcome, Matt. Great to have you guys all out. Oh, last question. Where are you? I'm in my attic. This is my attic. Installing insulation. We call it the seafoam pyramid. Yeah. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Really
All right, y'all. Have a good day. Enjoy this. Enjoy the sun.
Bye, guys.